It really makes you think, doesn't it? How the energy we use, the money in our accounts, and all those headlines about global events, they're all part of the same, well, intricate web. Seems to shift daily.
It does, yeah. And for anyone trying to, make sense of it all, connecting those dots is, well, it's crucial.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we're trying to do today. We're doing a deep dive into a YouTube transcript someone sent us. It's called Recherche, Energy, Sovereign Wealth, and the Bitcoin Arms Race. Hashtag Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 74. Wow, even the title kind of hints at the connections we're about to explore.
It certainly does. So our goal here is really to unpack the core insights from this discussion. Try to do it without just drowning you in information. We're aiming for, clarity and maybe those aha moments.
Okay, so if we boil it down, what's our main goal with this source? What's the mission for this deep dive?
Right. The mission is to look at these big global shifts, energy, finance, geopolitics, as they're laid out in the source material, and probably more importantly, try to understand what these shifts might actually mean for you.
Okay, let's start unpacking this. The transcript, it covers a lot of ground. Uh, what are the main threads we should be pulling on?
Well, three main areas really jump out. First, there's the whole evolving relationship between Bitcoin and traditional capital markets. This is highlighted by that big Abu Dhabi investment in Binance, and also the broader trend towards tokenizing assets.
Okay, interesting. What's the second area?
Second is macroeconomic trends. So we'll get into the discussion around U.S. debt, inflation figures, those tariff disputes, and, how central banks might be changing their game plan.
Right, the big economic forces that kind of shape things day to day. And the third?
And finally, geopolitics. The transcript, it touches on several key spots globally. The complexities in Syria, the ongoing conflict in Israel and Palestine, Russia-Ukraine dynamics, and of course, the strategic dance between China and the U.S.
Yeah, what really struck me about the source was how it tries to show these things aren't separate. It's not just, Bitcoin over here and geopolitics over there in a vacuum.
Exactly. That's where the real value is, I think, understanding those connections. This source offers a particular perspective on how these different fields influence each other, giving us maybe a more complete picture of what's going on globally.
All right, let's dive into that first area then, Bitcoin and capital markets. The transcript really highlights that significant investment by Abu Dhabi's sovereign wealth fund in Binance. Why is that such a big deal?
Well, what's fascinating is just the size of it, right? A $2 billion pledge from MGX, Abu Dhabi's fund, into Binance. I mean, this isn't just dipping a toe in. It signals a serious embrace of crypto by, established financial power in the Middle East. It suggests they see real potential, maybe even strategic importance there.
The transcript also talks about Binance going through a controlled demolition by the U.S. government. Can you unpack that a bit? What does that mean and why is it relevant here?
Right. So as you probably know, Binance faced some intense pressure from U.S. regulators, big fines, CEO, CZ stepping down, and they had to put in place these compliance measures kind of influenced by the U.S. This controlled demolition, as the source calls it, effectively shrunk Binance's U.S. footprint. But that created a sort of vacuum, an opportunity for other places to step up.
An opportunity for somewhere like the UAE, perhaps.
Precisely. The UAE has been quite proactive, building a regulatory setup that's pretty welcoming to crypto, including Bitcoin mining. So this investment, you could see it as the UAE strategically using the Binance situation in the U.S. to try and become, a major global crypto hub. The transcript even mentions their understanding of Bitcoin's geopolitical side as an energy play.
An energy play. Okay, let's unpack that. How is Bitcoin seen as an energy play here?
Well, think about it like this. Bitcoin mining uses a lot of energy. So places with lots of energy, especially energy that might be hard to use otherwise, they might see Bitcoin mining as a way to actually make money from that energy. The UAE, with all its oil and gas, they probably see this as a strategic fit, a way to sort of diversify their energy assets in this digital age.
That makes sense. Now, the transcript gets into some pretty ambitious ideas, using stablecoins and Bitcoin to leapfrog traditional markets, maybe even reverse the dollar milkshake theory. What's that all about?
Okay, yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. So the dollar milkshake theory, that's the idea that when things get shaky globally, the US dollar acts like this strong milkshake, and other currencies get kind of sucked into it, making the dollar stronger. The source suggests that by using stable coins and Bitcoin, especially in a place like Abu Dhabi with favorable tax rules, they could build these alternative financial systems, potentially pull capital away from the usual dollar system.
So a potential challenge to the dollar's dominance, basically.
That's the idea being discussed, yeah. The transcript even links this to the dollar proof of weapons network concept, the idea that the dollar strength is tied to U.S. military power and its ability to enforce financial rules. So by creating alternative financial pathways, the aim would be to lessen that dependence.
Pretty ambitious. And how do tokenized assets and exchanges fit into this picture?
Well, the long-term vision, it seems, involves a system where all sorts of assets, stocks, bonds, maybe even real estate are represented as digital tokens on a blockchain. And Binance, with its, 260 million users, that huge user base could provide the liquidity and network needed for these tokenized exchanges to actually take off, maybe leading to more efficient, accessible markets.
The transcript also mentions a blockchain arms race and Bitcoin's Lightning Network being important. What's that referring to?
Right. The blockchain arms race is basically the competition between different blockchain technologies. The Lightning Network, which kind of sits on top of Bitcoin, offers potentially much faster, cheaper transactions. It addresses some of Bitcoin's earlier scaling issues and adds privacy. So it could be really vital for building these new financial systems. Think of Bitcoin itself as the base layer and Lightning as like express lanes for smaller, quicker payments.
And this loops back to energy again, doesn't it? The transcript talks about an ongoing energy race and how mining can help use energy more efficiently.
Exactly. The argument presented is that Bitcoin mining can encourage investment in better energy infrastructure, and it can use energy that's stranded or excess, energy that might otherwise just be wasted. This fits with that idea of Bitcoin having a strategic role in the future of energy.
Okay, and finally for this section, there's this idea of nation states collecting Bitcoin as a strategic reserve, like the U.S. announcement. Does the source offer more on that?
Yeah, while the source notes the U.S. publicly acknowledging it holds some Bitcoin strategically, it also suggests that various players in the Middle East might have been quietly accumulating it too. The logic is, if the dollar's future dominance isn't guaranteed, holding Bitcoin could be a strategic move for nations, kind of like holding gold reserves is now. The source even hints that maybe short-term market dips could be influenced to allow for buying more, cheaper.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, let's shift gears now to the macroeconomic trends the transcript brings up. It starts with U.S. inflation data. What's the main point there?
Well, what's interesting is the potential gap between the official numbers, the CPI figures, which might show inflation dropping to, say, 2.8%, and what people are actually feeling in their wallets. The transcript suggests those official numbers might not really capture the full impact of higher prices on, everyday life.
And there's mention of some tension between the Federal Reserve and the Treasury over interest rates. What's the conflict there?
Right. So the Fed, its main job is controlling inflation, so it's been hesitant to cut rates too much. But the Treasury, which has to manage the growing U.S. national debt, well, it would generally prefer lower rates because that makes borrowing cheaper. So you've got this kind of natural tension between their priorities affecting monetary policy.
The transcript also has that slightly odd detail about Doge savings on the U.S. debt clock. What's the point of including that?
Yeah, the Doge savings thing. It's maybe a bit symbolic, but it seems to highlight the ongoing chatter about government spending and trying to reduce the debt. Even if the specific number isn't huge, it's like a visual nod towards trying to be fiscally responsible, even while budget fights and potential shutdowns are happening.
Speaking of shutdowns, the transcript mentions using those and budget talks as sort of strategic weapons. How does that work?
Well, shutdowns and budget debates can definitely be used as leverage, right? Political pressure points to push certain agendas. The source talks about requests for more discretionary spending happening at the same time as claims about saving money, which suggests maybe some strategic maneuvering in the whole budget process.
Then the conversation moves to tariffs, specifically the U.S.-Canada trade situation. What's the dynamic described there?
The U.S.-Canada dispute, with tariffs on steel and aluminum and then Canada hitting back, it's presented as a clear example of how tariffs can be used as an economic tool. A way to apply pressure and maybe try to restructure trade deals to be more favorable to one side.
And this leads to the European Commission hitting back with its own tariffs and a broader trend of money maybe moving into non-dollar markets.
Exactly. The EU's response with counter tariffs shows pushback against U.S. trade moves. And yeah, more broadly, the transcript suggests there's a growing trend of investors looking for diversification, moving capital into markets outside the U.S. dollar's orbit. That could potentially chip away at the dollar's long-held position as the main global reserve currency.
There's also an interesting point about the Fed letting bigger banks handle crypto custody while smaller banks find it harder. What could be the reason for that apparent difference?
That probably reflects a regulatory approach focused on managing risk, right?
Mm.
Letting the big established banks, the ones the OCC oversees, offer crypto custody might bring some institutional oversight and investment into crypto. Meanwhile, smaller banks under the FDIC might face tighter rules or just find it harder, maybe due to concerns about their ability to handle the risks involved with digital assets. The transcript kind of hints that regulators haven't always been thrilled with banks getting too deep into crypto in the past.
Right. And the last point in this macro section connects Bitcoin mining companies to the AI sector. What's that link?
Yeah, the connection is basically computing power. Both Bitcoin mining and this exploding field of AI development need massive amounts of computational power. So, as the demand for AI processing surges, some Bitcoin miners are apparently using their existing setups, their data centers, to provide computing resources for AI tasks. It creates this potentially symbiotic link between these two very tech-heavy industries.
That's a really interesting overlap. Okay, let's move to the geopolitical landscape now, as the transcript describes it. It's complex and, frankly, sometimes pretty concerning. It starts with Syria. How is the situation there painted?
Syria is shown as, well, incredibly fragmented, a place where multiple outside powers are chasing their own goals. The U.S. is mentioned as controlling key oil and wheat areas, Israel occupying the Golan Heights, Turkey has its influence through groups it supports, and then you've got all the internal factions like the Kurds, HTS. The source highlights the complexity, even mentioning things like a Russian oil tanker moving resources. It's a messy picture.
And the situation in Israel and Palestine. Tragically, always a concern. What details does the transcript offer on this ongoing conflict?
It portrays a really worrying picture. Continued Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon, alleged ceasefire violations. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza is described as, well, dire, with accusations of a deliberate starvation campaign and not enough aid getting through. It notes that a peace plan from Egypt and the GCC was rejected by both Israel and the U.S. The source even mentions some controversial bits, like the U.S. hostage envoy reportedly going off script about negotiating with Hamas and then being apparently fired, plus a UN report alleging potential genocidal acts by Israel, which predictably brought accusations of anti-Semitism against the UN itself.
Turning to Iran, the transcript mentions a letter from Trump about nuclear talks. What happened with that?
Yeah, Trump apparently sent a letter asking for nuclear talks but didn't offer any concessions. Unsurprisingly, Iran turned it down. The discussion also flags concerns about what could happen strategically if Iran's nuclear sites were targeted, specifically the risk of contaminating water supplies in nearby Qatar and the UAE. And it points to joint naval drills involving Russia, China, and Iran, suggesting their strategic ties in the region are getting stronger.
The Russia-Ukraine conflict is another huge focus. What are the main developments mentioned there?
Well, the transcript highlights Russia claiming the UK is a primary driver of the conflict. It also mentions Senator Marco Rubio's view that Ukraine might be ready for a ceasefire deal, but also lays out why such a deal probably wouldn't last. It notes the resumption of U.S. military aid to Ukraine, drone attacks hitting Moscow, more military cooperation between Ukraine and Finland, and also Putin putting out some conditional ceasefire proposal. So, lots of moving parts still.
And China's role on the world stage keeps expanding. What does the transcript say about its recent actions?
China's shown as really pushing its global presence. Those significant naval drills near Australia are given as a key example of its growing military reach. Xi Jinping planning a visit to the U.S. points to ongoing high-level talks between the superpowers. And the transcript really emphasizes China's fast progress in key tech areas like quantum computing, mentioning systems like Zhukan G3, and AI, like Maho Maho. It underscores their drive to be a world leader there.
Okay, finally on geopolitics, the transcript talks about broader trends, especially the BRICS alliance getting stronger. What examples are given?
Yeah, the strengthening BRICS connection is shown through a few things. Russia supposedly using crypto to trade oil with China and India, India investing strategically in Iran's Chibadar port, Russia developing that new Arctic shipping lane. These examples suggest a move towards, a more multipolar world with countries exploring options outside the traditional Western-led systems. The transcript even floats the idea of the U.S. maybe shifting focus more towards AI, potentially letting the EU handle more of the security machine role.
Wow, that is a lot to process. But the way these different threads, energy, finance, geopolitics, weave together is really striking. What are maybe one or two key aha moments we should pull from this deep dive?
I think one of the big ones is this growing sense, reflected in the source, of Bitcoin's strategic importance for nation states, not just as, something to speculate on, but as a potential tool in this shifting global landscape. Also, seeing how many global conflicts seem to have underlying drivers tied to energy control and financial clout, that becomes clearer when you look at it through this interconnected lens. It's not just tech innovation, it feels like a potential reordering of global power.
It's definitely eye-opening, even if some of this information feels pretty heavy and complex. But like we said at the start, being aware of these interconnected forces just seems increasingly vital.
Absolutely. It really means engaging with different kinds of information, doesn't it? Considering various viewpoints to get a handle on the shifts happening.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe here's a final thought for you. Considering all these global shifts we talked about today, the changing role of Bitcoin, those macroeconomic pressures, the tangled geopolitics, what's maybe one specific action you might think about taking just to better understand or maybe navigate this evolving landscape? Something to mull over as you go about your day.
Indeed. Always more to learn, always more to understand. It's definitely an ongoing process.
Well, thanks for digging into these connections with us. Until our next deep dive.